So we're back probed into the 5-volt wire of the map sensor. Got my other lead of the voltmeter just on battery ground. And I've got a test lamp in here with a 1/2 amp of current draw. Let's see what happens when we crank this car. Well, that's definitely not 5 volts. What's going on, everybody? Today we've got ourselves a little bit of an interesting one, because I get the interesting ones. It's a 2003 Chrysler Town and Country. The shop that had me check this thing basically said that it has a 5-volt reference code and then a battery temp sensor code that keeps coming back. And the battery temp sensor code is actually, or the battery temperature sensor is actually internal to the engine control module. So they wanted me to basically double check everything before condemning this module. And it actually set more codes than it did. This is the second time I've looked at it. The first time I looked at it, only had a this 5-volt reference or 5-volt supply output too low, this P1496. It had that code and this P1478 battery temperature sensor volts out of limit. And when I looked at it, it wasn't acting up. I checked my 5-volt on my sensor, or my map sensor. It was perfectly fine. On this vehicle, the only thing that has a 5-volt sensor is the map sensor, throttle position sensor, and the high side AC pressure sensor. That's the only things that have 5 volts going to them, according to the diagrams anyway. And we'll get into that in a little bit. All this other stuff actually set after we made my first recommended repair. When I first looked at it, like I said, it wasn't acting up, but I did notice that the factory plug wires were actually, when they were run through the bracket here, these have been changed and they're actually a little shorter so they don't fit how they was, but they were starting to arc to this bracket right here. And we was thinking that maybe that was somehow upsetting the PCM, having such a high voltage hitting the ground like that. So, you know, y'all have seen a few videos of mine where a strange misfire has caused cam sensor codes, a whole ECM to set programming fault codes. If you haven't seen that video, you know, you need to go find it. I'll put a little thing up here for you. So we was like, hey, let's just kind of rule this out because the fault is intermittent. And they replaced the plugs and the wires. Drove this thing for a day or two. They go to give it back to the customer thinking it's fixed, and she don't get out of the parking lot. As soon as she cranks it, it acts up. So let me show you kind of what it does when it does act up. Because right now it's broke. Luckily it's broke. I don't know how long it's going to stay broke, but crank it up. The first thing you'll see is it's got erratic idle. The battery light comes on. And checking my 5 volts. I actually have battery power on them. And if I cut the key off, that is ignition power feeding in there. If I turn the key back on, oh, you see that little on and then off? That was also timed with the fuel pump. Fuel pump cutting on and cutting off. If I crank it again, there we go. So I don't want to run it for too long because while it's broke, I want to do some tests. And to me, just knowing a little bit about these vehicles, I have a suspicion about what that voltage is. And it is not a short inside the PCM. I don't think. Pretty sure it's not. Okay, so like I said, the shop was really kind of concerned about this P1478 code, which is battery temp sensor volts out of limit. And if we look this code up, service information says that test 1, let me zoom this out so you can see the whole thing. The PCM has detected a fault with the battery temperature sensor, which is internal to the powertrain control module. If there are no possible causes remaining, view repair. And then it says review, replace and program the powertrain control module. What test possible causes? There is no possible causes listed for this code. So that's the test. We do have a set condition. The battery temperature sensor internal to the PCM goes above 4.9 volts or below 0.1 volt for more than 2.3 seconds, or 3.2 seconds. Possible causes, PCM. Well, just by that code description, the set condition, I'm going to assume that this is a thermistor inside the PCM that is being fed 5 volts in and short or sent to ground on the opposite side, and the PCM is looking for that thermistor to pull that 5 volts down. So, like I said before, we've got 3 sensors that use a 5 volt, and that's it. So what are the chances this internal sensor also uses that 5 volt circuit? I think it's a pretty good possibility. I don't exactly know 100% how this sensor functions inside the PCM, but that's just my guess. So if we've got 5 volt issues, I think that could definitely cause an issue with this battery temp sensor. So I want to more or less focus on that 5 volt code, which you already see we have battery voltage on that. So if we have battery voltage backfeeding into the 5 volt circuit in the PCM, it's likely, possible that that would elevate this 4.9 volts, above that to get it out of that threshold. So that's where I'm going to go with this thing. And what I'm kind of thinking, when I first key on that, and we seen that first pulse of the voltage and then off, to me, that acts just like the ASD relay. First turning on and then off. And then once you actually crank it, it's back on again. That is exactly what I think is wrong with this thing. I think somewhere I have my ASD relay output is shorting into my 5 volt wire, backfeeding back into the PCM. I'm going to be using the aftermarket redrawn diagrams on this just because I can show everything all in one page and I don't have to bounce back and forth. So I got the 5 volt circuit highlighted, and as you can see coming off the ECM, it's pin 61, it's a pink and yellow wire, it says it's 5 volts, and it comes across and has a splice pack that goes to the manifold pressure sensor, the throttle body position sensor, and the AC pressure sensor. It's the only thing that 5 volt goes to. You think, well, what about the crank sensor and cam sensor and all that? Well, on this particular car, they are actually 8 volt. So as you can see right here, this is 8 volt supply. It's a little strange, but you know, they did that for a couple of years. And then on the opposite side of the diagram over here, I have the ASD relay, the automatic shutdown relay, and what all it feeds. So it is a brown and white wire coming out of the integrated power module, and it goes down and feeds the ignition coil, the 2 upstream oxygen sensors. Well, I guess we only have 1 oxygen sensor for upstream and 1 for downstream on this thing, but it feeds 2 oxygen sensors. It also has this splice that feeds the ECM. So the ECM actually gets power from the ASD relay. And then the generator field coil, which is alternator. And on the other page here, it feeds all 6 fuel injectors. So it feeds ignition coil, injectors, alternator, PCM, oxygen sensors. So why do I think that is what's causing my issue? Well, it's purely just how it reacts when key on it turns on. It's basically gives the PCM a chance to circuit check everything before it actually cranks. Like it's circuit checking all the fuel injectors, for instance. Like if one of the fuel injectors is unplugged and you key on, it circuit checks that. It's looking for a power coming back from the fuel injector. So to me, that's it turning on for a circuit check. So I got a little test that I want to do to prove this out. And since the PCM is responsible for turning the relay on, as well as it gets some power from the relay, I kind of want to rule out my issue being the PCM. So I'm simply just going to unplug the PCM, and we're going to actually feed power into the ASD relay circuit through a test light and see if we have voltage to our map sensor. I still have my voltmeter here, back probed into the map sensor, 5-volt supply wire, pink and yellow. Okay. And then I've still got my ground lead attached to battery. Okay, so what I've got, how I'm going to do this is my test lead here is connected to 12 volt and is just run into my 2 amp filament on my test light bulb. And the output side, we're going to feed into the connector for that has the ASD input to the PCM. So I've got both connectors unplugged because one, the connector C1 here, terminal 6, this brown and white wire right here, that is my ASD supply coming into the PCM. And on C2 is my pink and yellow wire right here. That is my 5-volt supply to everything. So I want both of these unplugged so that I know my issue can't be inside the PCM. So what do you think? What do you think is going to happen when we connect this to the brown and white wire right here? It's connector C1, pin 6. What do you think we're going to see with our voltmeter? What do you think the light bulb is going to do? Okay, let's find out. So terminal 6, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Look at that, we got a bulb glowing a little bit. It's not completely bright. It's not using the full 2 amps, but it is consuming some power. And we have 9 volts making its way to our map sensor. Now you might be wondering, why is my bulb lit? That would indicate a short to ground. Well, there's a path to ground, and you've got to think that even though my PCM is unplugged, there's still some things that are attached to the circuit that have a path to ground. One of them being the alternator, the generator. So if I was to reach down here and unplug this, if I can, I've not unplugged it yet, so I might not be able to. Come on. There we go. Our bulb got just a little dimmer. Our voltage has gotten a little bit higher. So there's still some things, you know, finding its way to ground. It's not necessarily a short, it's just things have a path to ground. So now the thing is where is these two wires shorted together? Well, you need to kind of look at your 5-volt circuit, where it all goes, and where all this ASD relay circuit goes, to find where that voltage is getting bled over or shorted together. And for me, what just instantly pops in my head that would be a good place to start would be where the ASD relay is sending power up to the fuel injectors. Because I've got 3 injectors on this side, 3 on the back side there, and then my 5-volt wire runs down right into the same harness as all my injectors. And that is actually running down under this where you can't even really see it, and then back here up into the coil and the harness here. So that's kind of where I'm going to start looking, is this right here, and hope we find something. Now, the way I'm going to go about this is I've added a second bulb to add some load, but specifically on the 5-volt side of this circuit. And I'm basically just going to wiggle check and see if I can wiggle this light to go off. I still have my one feeding power into the circuit, and I've added one over here to load the 5-volt side. So with this one, I could wiggle test, and this might always stay lit because something on the ASD circuit is consuming power, which is fine. I'm looking for this one to go out or dim out or do anything. So basically, since I'm thinking my issue is up under here, I'm just going to get back there and just kind of grab the harness, do some wiggle checks, and see if we can get this thing to do anything. And oh, look at that. So I'm pulling on the harness, pulling it backwards. As you can see, it's also making this side go out. So yeah, and that is because this is just getting extra load from this bulb right here. So pulling that is making our short go away. Let's see, our voltage goes away. And like I say, I don't know if I can get you guys in here to see or not. Probably not. I'm just kind of like pulling this harness back. Just giving it some stress, basically. So I definitely think my issue is back in there, like somewhere in there up into here. So that's not going to be very fun to get to. I think I've spotted it. If I can get in here with you guys. This connector here is supposed to be on here, on this little bracket. I just got it pulled off, and that's what I was pulling on. I was basically moving this back and forth, and you can see my light goes dim, meaning my short went away, or my path to this 5-volt went away. But what I've got down here looking with the flashlight, I'm really not sure if I'm going to be able to get you guys in here to see this. You can see that purple wire right there has a split in it. Come on, focus. There we go. You see that little split? Well, this wire right here is my ASD wire. My 5-volt wire is actually on the bottom side over there. You can barely kind of see the pink in there. It's almost like this harness has heated up in here to the point where my wires are actually deteriorating and making connection. You can kind of see how that's just kind of crumbling open right there. So I really think this is my problem. And that would make sense because that silver pipe down there, that is the exhaust manifold that wraps around to the front. So it's basically the Y pipe to the back. And that is where it's kind of like leaning down towards it, real close to it. So I really think that's where my issue is. If I unplug that connector, I know my path up here is going to go away, possibly to everything else. So I don't think unplugging it is a very valid test because I really think it's just going to go away. I think what I'm going to have to do is actually get that harness out a little bit and get that protective shield off of it, that cloth shield, and just inspect it. We already know we have wire damage there, so that really needs to be addressed anyway. It needs to be fixed. So we need to really get into this harness and see if we can find something else in there. It's a little worse than I thought it was going to be. I really don't know what to do about it. It is extremely dried out, cracking, falling apart. Yeah, it is really bad. This is my pink 5-volt wire, and you can see how much of the insulation has fell off on it. That is just, you know, trying to get this thing unplugged and get it out of here. So this harness is in very bad shape right here. So I'm gonna get with the shop and go over the options with them. We're gonna see if maybe we can get this plug in like a service connector or just this whole harness. I really think it's just gonna go up into the injectors in the map sensor, because it goes just right here and then splits into this stuff. So that's going to be my best suggestion, is see if we can get this whole little harness and replace the whole thing. If not, maybe see if we can get this in a service connector with terminal leads on it that I can solder in and cut this bad spot out of it. But pretty safe to say that that's our fault right there. So what do you do? I mean, it's an old vehicle, and I don't know how available parts are. I'm sure that harness was available at one time. But it is what it is. We'll fix it the best we can for this customer and get it back on the road. It just may not be the repair that I want. I may end up having to unpin all of those terminals and heat shrinking the bad section, just sliding a whole piece of heat shrink over it and just resealing that whole section. That, you know, if we can't get parts, that's probably going to be like my only option. So what would you guys do in this situation? Let me know down in the comments. And I think that's going to be it for this one, because I don't know when I'll be able to get back to fix it. So we're just going to leave it at that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. we was able to very quickly kind of narrow down what was going on with this car just because we understood the mechanics of the circuits. So one of those where I kind of had a head start because I kind of just knew from how it was acting kind of what I should be looking for. So thanks for watching, everybody. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, leave some comments down there. I read all of them. And if you got questions, I always try to answer them best I can. And we'll see you guys later.